Cover Up, Chapter 18, All Out Blitz. Kelleher had pointed out at dinner that Saturday was usually the longest and most boring day of Super Bowl week. Other than the announcement of the Hall of Fame vote, which wouldn't come until 2 o'clock, there was nothing going on. There was no access to the teams, who would be moving to different hotels that day to ensure that no one would know where they were or bother them the night before the game. For most reporters, there wasn't much doing, so the Marriott lobby was still pretty empty at 7 a.m., which meant Stevie could pace without attracting too much attention. Susan Carroll arrived about 5 minutes before Dr. Arciero. If Arciero was nervous, he didn't show it. "We need to go someplace private so I can walk you guys through what's in here," he said, holding up a thick manila envelope. "You're going to need to take some notes." "My room's a mess, but it's quiet," Stevie said. "That works," Arciero said. Once they were in the room, Arciero opened the envelope. Stevie cleared off the desk where his computer had been, and Arciero spread out the documents. "I haven't even looked at these myself," he said. "I just took them from Gus, sent him to bed, then called you. Give me a minute." As it turned out, Gus Mazaka had brought the test results from all 23 players who had been tested after the conference championship game. Arciero walked them through how to reread the reports. "Here, look at Eddie's," he said. "See the notation that he has traces of allopurinol in his system? He has a tendency to run high levels of uric acid, and allopurinol controls that. He's registered with the league as taking it for medical reasons. So when it shows up in his system, the league looks at it, sees he's been cleared to take it, and he's fine." Okay, now we get to the serious stuff. Here's Bill Bryant. Look at the bottom of his notes. Look at the notes at the bottom. "Clear traces of HGH appear in patient's blood work. Hormone level is raised. Testosterone level is raised synthetically." "What exactly does that mean?" Susan Carroll asked. "Different men have different levels of testosterone. Some are naturally higher than others. What the tester is saying here is that Bryant's raised testosterone level isn't caused naturally. That is the result of something you put in his body." "HGH," Stevie said. "Based on this, yeah," Arciero said. They went through the remaining reports. The 5 starting offensive linemen were almost identical. Only Steve Sanders, the left tackle, had a notation saying his high testosterone level might be natural based on prior testing. "Looks like he might have suspected they'd be tested again. He was trying to get off the stuff," Arciero said. "His levels are lower than the others." "But he was still taking it?" Susan Carroll said. "We don't want to accuse anyone unfairly." "He was taking... See, it says so right there. It just appears he may have stopped at some point. The others apparently didn't." He shut the files with a disgusted look on his face. "Idiots," he said. "Even if you put aside the fact that they're cheating and breaking the rules, they're probably killing themselves." "You know that for sure?" Stevie said. "We don't know anything for sure," Arciero said. "But the more we know about steroids, the more dangerous they appear to be. That's why you starting to see players from the 1970s and 80s suddenly die in their 40s and 50s. "Scary," Susan Carroll said. "Not scary enough, apparently," Arciero answered. He stood to go. "I hate being part of this," he said as he walked to the door. "I'd rather you not use my name in the story, but if you have questions during the day, you can reach me on my cell." They thanked him at the door and watched him walk down the hall. "He's a brave man," Susan Carroll said. "Deep down, he has to know he'll be fingered as a source and that the team will come after him." "What about Eddie?" She sighed. "They'll probably figure that out, too. They know we both know Eddie. You wrote about Eddie and Darren and interviewed them both on CBS. And it was Darren who came to our rescue yesterday. Maybe Snow didn't recognize him, but..." Stevie hoped she was wrong. Problem was, she was always almost right. They woke Kelleher and Mearns soon after to tell them about Arciero's visit. "We need a quiet, private place to work on this," Kelleher said. "Let's meet in the media workroom." "Won't there be people in there?" "Not at this hour," he said. "I'll bet we can even order room service and just charge it to one of our rooms." He was right. There was no one in the huge room when Stevie and Susan Carroll arrived. They showed the documents to Bobby and Tamara and showed them the parts Arciero had pointed out as being crucial. By lunchtime, they had written close to 2,000 words explaining the saga. Their lead was direct. 5 members of the California Dreams tested positive for human growth hormone, HGH, after the Dreams' victory over the Washington Redskins in the NFC Championship game, according to medical documents acquired by the Washington Herald. Although the positive test should have triggered a second round of confirming tests, Dreams owner Donald Meeker engaged in a widespread cover-up to ensure that the players, All of them starting offensive linemen would not face suspension for tonight's Super Bowl game. Under league rules, players are automatically suspended from their next game if both A and B blood samples test positive for HGH. But because of the cover-up, second samples were not taken from the players in question. Asked what the chances were that the second samples would not come back positive, one doctor familiar with the test said about 100 to 1 against. The Players Union has tried to portray this test as having a high false positive rate, but I found it to almost be completely accurate. It's pretty clear these guys are taking HGH. The second test isn't much more than a formality. They talked about whether that quote from Arciero would unmask him as a source. Not necessarily, they decided, since they could have showed the test results to any doctor familiar with HGH, and he would have drawn the same conclusion. The issue is going to be who gave you the test results, Kelleher said, not what a doctor thinks looking at them. The rest of the story laid out the backstory of the new NFL drug testing system and why the league felt it necessary to adopt it, and how it played out during the first season. They worked in a quote from the commissioner from his press conference, but clearly stated that the league hadn't anticipated the potential for manipulation of the tests. Then they went into what might happen, and the penalties the players, the team, and Meeker might face. Kelleher and Mearns went through the story in detail and rewrote a number of paragraphs. It was almost 1 o'clock. People were starting to trickle into the room. Okay, our room should be clean by now, and it's pretty big, Kelleher said. Let's go up there and get this to the paper and the lawyers in Washington. Then we'll decide when we're going to call Goodell and when we're going to call Meeker. Call Goodell and Meeker? Stevie said. What for? Kelleher smiled. For a story like this, you have to give people a chance to comment. Goodell will express shock and say the league will investigate. That's all about he can say. Meeker may hang up on us or curse at us. Who knows? But you have to give him a chance to say something. But won't the story get out once we call them for comment? Susan Carroll asked. Absolutely. The Herald will post a bulletin online this evening, and the story will be in our first edition, which hits the streets around 9 o'clock tonight. Sunday's news really breaks Saturday night. One other thing, Kelleher said. What's that? Stevie said. You guys need to call your parents. They need to hear this from you. Oh, God, Susan Carroll said. Not again. Kelleher smiled. Yes, Susan Carroll, he said. Again. The session with the lawyer was both serious and funny at the same time. Kelleher put her on the speakerphone in the room, and she began asking questions. This shouldn't take more than an hour, said the lawyer, whose name was Heather Matlock. An hour, Kelleher said. This is a newspaper story, not a book. A very controversial news story with all sorts of legal implications, Matlock said. She had a point. Many of her questions were understandable. Without asking for names, she wanted to know how reliable the sources quoted in the story were. There were also questions that were borderline silly. Are you sure this doctor is a doctor? She asked about Arciero at one point. If he's not, all the people he's done surgery for are in for quite of a shock, Kelleher said. Heather Matlock didn't even giggle. She also asked at one point if Stevie and Susan Carroll had actually seen the test results. Heather, the story says according to documents obtained by the Washington Herald, Kelleher said. Oh, that's a reference to the test results? Matlock said. Stevie could see Kelleher biting his lip. He knew he was thinking the same thing. No, it's a reference to today's Indianapolis Star. Kelleher resisted. Yes, that's what that is. Matlock proved to be right. The session took a little more than an hour. As if to prove she was somehow in charge, she concluded by saying, I'm going to sign off on this on the condition that you get responses from the owner, what's his name, Meeker, and from the commissioner. Kelleher sighed. Heather, I've been doing this for a few years now. I know how to be a reporter. Your name isn't on the story, Bobby, Matlock replied. We're running a story about a major scandal written by a couple of 14-year-olds. If I'm not cautious, I'm not doing my job. Yeah, I hear you, Heather. But they've got this nailed, I promise. They signed off with Heather Matlock. Tamara had gone downstairs to cover a Hall of Fame press conference. When do we talk to Goodell and Meeker? Susan Carroll asked. When the press conference is over. Tamara's going to tell Goodell's main PR guy that it's going to be vitally important that we talk to the commissioner around 6 o'clock. After we talk to him, we call Meeker on that cell phone number you got, Susan Carroll. The deadline is 6:30, so we'll phone the quotes in fast. There will be a bulletin about the story on our website at 8 o'clock, and the full story will be out there at 9. Then the bullets will start flying. Stevie shuddered a bit. In the other stories he and Susan Carroll had broken, the bad guys had all been caught before the papers hit the stands. To him, the writing of a story like this should mean the adventure was over, that the bad guys were out of circulation. But this time the bad guys would still be out there, and would be very, very angry. The next few hours crawled by. They rewrote a few paragraphs and took a few calls from the editors at the Herald asking questions. Susan Carroll went briefly to the Canterbury to pick up some things. They agreed she should stay with them at the Marriott after the news broke. Tamara came back to report that the highlight of the Hall of Fame press conference had been the announcement that Tony Kornheiser, one of Stevie's heroes in journalism, had just been voted into the Writers and Broadcasters wing. I guess they know who he is, Stevie said, remembering an incident in New Orleans when a hotel clerk had not known who Kornheiser was, much to Tony's dismay. More important, I talked to Joe Brown, Tamara said. He was pretty baffled by the whole thing, but he promised that the commissioner would call here at 6 o'clock. He said he'd only have about 5 minutes. When he hears what the story is, he'll have more than 5 minutes, Kelleher said. How are we going to do this? Stevie asked. We'll put him on speaker, and we'll do the same thing if we get Meeker, and let him know that there are 3 Herald reporters on the call. I'll simply read the first few paragraphs of the story, then let him comment. It's all a bit scary, isn't it? said Susan Carroll, making Stevie feel better about his case of nerves. Kelleher said. I hope you aren't having second thoughts, because it's too late to back out now. Second thoughts? Susan Carroll said. No way. We're reporters. We have a story. We have to tell it. Even if it is frightening, Stevie said. That's exactly right, Kelleher said. You guys will be fine. We're the good guys. Always remember that. Stevie didn't feel like such a good guy when he got his parents on the phone. He tried to downplay the story, telling them that he and Susan Carroll had stumbled on another scandal, a cover-up involving the Dreams, and that the story would be in the Sunday's Herald, and they would probably be hearing their names on TV again later that night. What kind of scandal? His father wanted to know. It involves HGH, Stevie said. Guy is testing positive? Yes. And the team is covering it up. And you can prove it? Yes. Oh my God. Let me talk to Bobby. He passed the phone to Kelleher, who was alternately apologetic and firm, telling Bill Thomas that he would be very proud of Stevie and assuring them he would be in good hands until he got home to Philadelphia. A few minutes later, he had a similar conversation with Don Anderson. When the two of them talk to one another, which they will, Susan Carroll said, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. I suspect we'll all be in a lot of trouble, Kelleher said. But we'll deal with that in a day or two. For now, we still have to get the story into the newspaper. We can deal with the fallout later. They took a walk to get some fresh air, then watched a college basketball game between Indiana and Illinois on TV. I love that orange jacket that Bruce Weber wears, Tamara said when the Illinois coach came on camera wearing a jacket that looked a lot like an orange creamsicle to Stevie. Beyond that, there wasn't much chatter except for Susan Carroll saying quietly, "Thank goodness," when the Duke Florida State score flashed on the screen, showing that Duke had pulled out a 77-73 victory at home. Stevie had just looked at his watch for perhaps the 1,000th time when the phone rang. Even though it was exactly 6 o'clock and the phone was supposed to ring, the sound was almost jarring. Kelleher picked up the phone. Joe Brown had placed the call for Goodell. We're ready to go on this end, Joe, Kelleher said. Goodell was obviously standing right there because a second later, Stevie heard Kelleher say, Commissioner, I know how busy you are tonight, so I'm going to put you on speakerphone right away and let Steve Thomas and Susan Carroll Anderson say hello to you. Kelleher laughed. No, we're not ganging up on you, but they actually wrote the story we need to ask you about. I'm just sort of the on-site editor. Stevie was consistently amazed by Kelleher's willingness to give up the spotlight. All week, he had been setting Stevie up with stories that he easily could have written himself, and now, on a story that would no doubt make huge headlines, he was doing everything he could to make it happen, while taking none of the credit for himself. Kelleher hit the speaker button and said, Roger, can you hear me? I can hear you, Goodell said. Steve, Susan Carroll, I've been watching your work all week. It's been terrific. Stevie and Susan Carroll both said thank you and brief hellos. You might not enjoy this piece of work as much, Kelleher said, but they've done a great job nailing this story down, and I think it's important you be aware of it before it breaks in a few hours because you're going to be bombarded once it's out. Joe told me it was something like that. I'm listening. I think the easiest thing to do is to read you the first few graphs. You'll understand where we're going pretty quickly. He proceeded to read the first 5 paragraphs to Goodell. At one point, Stevie thought he heard Goodell say, Oh, holy. When Kelleher got to the point where he was going to start explaining how the NFL's drug testing rules worked, he stopped. "Do you want more?" he asked. "No," Goodell said. "I've heard enough." There was a lengthy silence on the other end of the phone. Stevie was going to say something, but Kelleher put his finger up to indicate he should stay quiet. Stevie noticed Kelleher was looking at his watch. He realized what he was doing, timing how long it took Goodell to say something. I'm honestly not sure I can say anything, or should say anything, Goodell said finally. "Bobby, can we go off the record for just 1 minute?" "Why?" Kelleher said. I just want to ask you one question." Kelleher was silent for a second. "Okay," he said, "but you know we need an on-the-record response from you." "I know that," Goodell said. "My question's simple. Are you absolutely 100% certain about this? The story's been lawyered. Everything." Kelleher smiled. "That's a reasonable question. Yes, we're sure. And so are our lawyers. You've seen the test results then. Someone didn't just tell you what was in them?" "Commissioner, the story says documents obtained by the Washington Herald. We've got them right here with us now, right now." Goodell sighed. "Okay. You know I'd like to consult with Joe before I answer." "And you know we don't want an answer crafted by Joe. We want your answer. You're the commissioner." More silence. "Ready?" Goodell said. "Been ready," Kelleher said. "The accusations made by the story are, of course, stunning and frightening for a number of reasons. Clearly, we must undertake a full and thorough investigation, and I can only hope that this story proves to be untrue. If it is true, the League will act swiftly and thoroughly to punish anyone found guilty of wrongdoing." He stopped. They waited for more. "That's it," Goodell said. "That's all I've got." "But what about the game?" Susan Carroll asked, echoing the exact 5 words flashing through Stevie's mind. "What about it?" Goodell asked. "You're going to let them play?" "As of this moment, I've got absolutely no proof that anyone is guilty of anything," Goodell said. "I can't take action against people based on a newspaper story. All of you know that." "What if someone turned over the documentation to you?" Kelleher said. "That's still just the first sample. Until there's a B sample, no one could be considered guilty." "But there is no B sample because of Meeker's cover-up," Stevie said. Then he realized he was yelling when Susan Carroll and Kelleher shot him looks. "That's your allegation, Steve," Goodell said. "It may prove true, it may not. But again, I can't take any action based on it." "So the 5 guys play tomorrow night," Kelleher said. "I've got no evidence that could lead to a suspension." "I've got a question, Commissioner," Susan Carroll said. "Hypothetically, if someone took a drug test the day after the conference championship game and tested positive, would there be enough time to get results back for a second before the Super Bowl?" "Absolutely," Goodell said. "And if someone came back positive on both samples, you would suspend them for the Super Bowl." "I would have no choice under the collective bargaining agreement," Goodell said. "They would be suspended. Period." Kelleher followed up. "So if an owner or a coach had a player test positive, and he wanted him to play in the Super Bowl, covering up the A sample and stalling on the B sample would be the way to go." "You know I didn't say that, Bobby. What I will say is this. We can't suspend a player until we get both samples back. It's exactly the same as Olympic drug rules." Kelleher looked at Stevie and Susan Carroll to see if they had any more questions. "Commissioner, thank you," he said. "Bobby, Steve, Susan Carroll, you just ruined my weekend." "That's on the record," Kelleher said. Goodell laughed. "That's fine. It happens to be true." He hung up. "Okay," Kelleher said. "One more call to make." "I suspect this one won't be nearly as pleasant," Susan Carroll said. "That may be the understatement of the week," Kelleher answered. He picked the phone back up and started dialing.